This is a journey into a world of mystery and deceit, a fantastical place full of UFOs, strange encounters, and stories of alien abduction. My name is Nick Cook. I work for Jane's Information Group, which has reported on defense issues since 1898. I investigate secret military programs worth billions of dollars, but hidden from public view. I dig out evidence of classified technologies developed by the defense industry and concealed behind a network of false trails. It's my job to find out what really has been flying through our airspace. So from time to time, I examine sighting evidence of unidentified flying objects. Do these sightings offer evidence of top-secret military and defense technology, or do they hold clues to something more mysterious? My plan is to trace the UFO story decade by decade, from early sightings during the Second World War to the mass reports of alien abduction that swept America in the 80s and 90s. This world is normally off limits for a journalist. But I want to discover for myself what is real and what is not. People send me pictures like these every week, and most of them are pretty obvious hoaxes. But very occasionally, something genuinely intriguing arrives. Like this one, for example, a picture taken by a Canadian Air Force pilot on a military exercise. And what it shows is indeed quite startling. I've seen many pictures like this, all of them taken by aircrew, people who are trained to record data. UFOs are a taboo subject in the military, and very much for an aerospace journalist like me. Pilots who report them risk being grounded, or perhaps even referred to a psychiatrist for an assessment. So these pictures tend to arrive on my desk anonymously, and for good reason. But these pictures resonate with me because the matter of who you share airspace with when you're traveling at twice the speed of sound really is a matter of life and death. I've spent 20 years writing about leading-edge aerospace technology. I've probably interviewed thousands of pilots in that time. A handful of them are reporting UFO incidents that are genuinely mysterious. I want to know what it is, though, these men are really seeing. The history of UFO sightings is not a long one, but it's a bit longer than most people suspect. To start to make sense of UFOs, you must go back to the 1940s, to the Second World War and these men, and what some of them saw in the night skies over Europe. Allied aircrews described being tracked by glowing balls of light which they called Foo Fighters, after an American comic strip. This is one of the first recorded reports of a UFO sighting. It's taken from the official RAF archives, and it is highly unusual. It recounts the story of one pilot officer called B.C. Lumsden, who saw something extremely unusual during a bombing raid over Germany on the 7th of December 1942.
We were cruising at 7,000 feet when we discovered we had company, an orange-coloured light off the port wing. At first I thought it was tracer flak, but discounted this when I saw how slowly and controlled it was moving.
What the hell is it?
It seemed to be playing with Red 2, diving around the fuselage. Suddenly it turned starboard and headed straight for us. I found it hard to make other members of the squadron believe me. But the following night, one of the squadron flight commanders had a similar experience, with a green light.
It's gone, it's gone, it's gone!
A handful of Foo Fighters sightings could be dismissed as pilot error, but there were hundreds, if not thousands, of these unexplained phenomena. Could they all be the hallucinations of tired or terrified men? I've decided to find out more about these strange balls of fire. Military historians Dave Clark and Andy Roberts are leading experts on UFO sightings during the Second World War.
People were seeing tiny balls of light, not much bigger than a beach ball, say, to full-blown flying saucers in the style that we would appreciate today. And there's a problem of reporting them at debriefing, because if you had bomber crews landing and saying, you know, we saw these peculiar lights chasing us for miles and miles and miles, some of the bomber crews I've spoken to were fearful that they'd get grounded for lack of moral fibre, for inventing things to get them grounded, some form of psychological problem. First, the RAF and the Air Ministry were extremely concerned because they thought perhaps it was some form of German secret weapon. And it is known that the Nazis did have some quite novel varieties of anti-aircraft, such as Scarecrow and things of that nature, which threw huge metal bars around in the sky, which people saw. And that was designed to unnerve people as much as to damage aeroplanes.
These designs, taken from secret engineering blueprints seized by the Allies at the end of the war, show just how radical the Nazis' aerospace programs were. And it was plans like these that were unsettling the Allied forces. Going through American files of the kind of technological plunder operation that they did on Germany after the war, they do describe technologies that could be pieced together to develop a kind of Foo Fighter type weapon.
They were working on all these bizarre little things, but none of these things ever came to fruition. Had the war gone on much longer, or had the Germans won, then we may have seen these things develop in the same way that we saw the Americans develop space technology after the war.
The evidence for Foo Fighters is intriguing, but I wonder whether there is anything more than the log reports by the pilots who described screaming dogfights with strange balls of light. I've come to California to meet physicist and technology historian John Dering. He has first-hand information on the development of Foo Fighters.
I interviewed a German aircraft engineer who had actually worked on these vehicles in the prototype stage and in the early phases of production. These were vehicles that were unmanned. They were what we would probably best describe today as unmanned aerial combat vehicles. These were vehicles that were not just sent up for surveillance purposes. They actually had a purpose of remotely controlled to engage the Allied aircraft, the bombers in particular, by basically trying to apply a mechanism that was not necessarily a catastrophic destructive effect, such as blowing the Foo Fighter up and taking the aircraft down. This was intended to be something that could be reused multiple times.
There's plenty of anecdotal evidence that Allied air crewmen saw these things over Germany, but what about hard evidence on the ground that this technology was actually pursued by the Germans?
One of the reports that I have seen and looked over was in reference to a project in the Black Forest that involved a small vehicle that was specifically intended to be an interceptor for advanced air defense against Allied bombers. Now that document actually came from a U.S. intelligence officer, and so I have pretty high certainty that that was real.
I want to follow up on John Dering's research. His work indicates there was secret technology being developed in Nazi-occupied Central Europe, which might account for some of the UFO sightings. These are the Sudeten Mountains on the Polish-Czech border. During World War II, this beautiful valley was home to some of the finest scientific minds of the Third Reich. It was here that the Nazis built one of their underground research facilities, the Wenceslas mine. I'm meeting Polish military historian Igor Witkowski, who will guide me round the mine, a vast underground complex hidden away from Allied bombs, which Nazi slave labor carved out of the Sudeten mountains.
Example of a surface infrastructure being kind of a reflection of the underground facility.
It was here, in the desperate last months of the war, that German scientists worked around the clock to produce Kriegensscheiden, the war-winning technology that might produce a stunning knockout blow, even as the Nazis were being pushed back towards Germany. As Igor guided me through the flooded tunnels, the air became heavy and difficult to breathe. So in effect, we've come hundreds of meters through this complex, and we're now deep into the mountain.
Not hundreds of meters, but several kilometers, in fact.
This is several kilometers into the mountain.
Yes.
And this would have been a highly secure, impenetrable assembly site.
Exactly, and the secrecy around this place was very exceptional, so that the Allies never found out about it.
Almost nothing exists of the original mine. As the Nazis retreated in 1945, they sealed most of the tunnels, leaving the advanced technology buried beneath impenetrable walls of rock. The Allies did capture one man who knew all about this place, and he wasn't a token find. His name was SS General Jakob Sporenberg, and he was in charge of the technical program at the mine. What he revealed astonished his interrogators. Indeed, I find it surprising 60 years later. He spoke of a secret experiment attempting nothing less than to conquer gravity. He described a bell-shaped device that needed enormous amounts of electrical power. It was made of a hard, heavy metal and filled with a mercury-like substance that was violet in color and glowed when under test. People who worked on the bell suffered from sleep problems and severe vertigo. 5 of the 7 scientists died while working on the project. In a memo to Hitler, the scientists wrote, "It is in our opinion that the scientific results ascertained from our experiments with the bell are truly decisive for the war." Experiments with the bell happened deep underground in the mine, but directly above it, on the surface, was this strange structure. Called the flytrap, it first showed up on an Allied aerial reconnaissance photo in 1944. Igor Witkowski believes that the flytrap was a test rig for advanced propulsion technology. In other words, flying saucers.
There is a extremely strong and thick steel reinforcement of the pillars, which means that it was to withstand some great forces working on it.
How did it work? We don't know exactly, but we do know from Sporenberg's evidence that the bell was a revolutionary device, and the flytrap, designed as its test rig, was fed with underground cables running to the heart of the structure. So the cabling led down here,
Right away
from the power station over there.
Yes, up to the flytrap.
Right.
It was
Well, they're actually
virtually filled with high voltage
Yeah.
cables. as thick as an arm.
Right.
You know, that thickness. I have photographs of them, and that's just another strange fact that point out to such a possibility that it would have been used for some experimental purposes.
I mean, they're actually pretty sizable. It's kind of like 1.5 meters of concrete-lined ducting down here.
Yes, exactly. Pretty solid.
So it all adds up to, I mean, pretty strong evidence that the power station over there was feeding this tremendous amount of power to the facility, the fly trap over there.
Just there, exactly.
Yeah.
In a way.
This is interesting. I've spent a long time researching the quest to produce anti-gravity technology, the holy grail of aerospace design, that would overturn conventional physics and allow us to travel in deep space. Is it possible that the UFO sightings over Nazi Germany were related to this quest?
There is a sense here that the Germans were engaged in very highly classified work, and that possibly they were engaged in anti-gravity type programs.
What I do know is that many of these bizarre projects like the Bell did not remain in German hands. At the end of the war, they were plundered secretly by the American High Command and taken to the States. The speculation about Foo Fighters was about to be overshadowed by one of the most sensational UFO sightings of all, the 1947 incident at Roswell in New Mexico. That's where I'm heading next.
The 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like.
In July 1947, a UFO is supposed to have exploded in midair over Roswell, New Mexico, showering its debris over a remote ranch nearby. The actual saucer itself is said to have come down here on the plains of San Agustin. UFO proponents doggedly say that this vehicle that allegedly crashed here was extraterrestrial.
The Roswell crash is the best known case in the annals of ufology. Supporters of the extraterrestrial explanation claim that the military recovered crash debris and alien bodies from a site located on the very edge of a top-secret military base called White Sands. The press had a field day. Reports of a crashed disc hit the headlines, and Roswell quickly became a national controversy. The military were quick to retract stories of bodies and a disc, but their denials just fueled the belief they were hiding something. The rumors about Roswell refuse to die. I've come here to White Sands to find out the reason. There's something strange about the sky here. I'm over 5,000 feet above sea level, and the air is crystal clear. I've come to meet Mike Smith and Wayne Matson, two former Air Force officers who have lived in the area for some time. Mike explains that the desert climate can throw strange shapes into the air.
A lot of them are astronomical phenomena that in our desert atmosphere here provides practically an infinity of weather conditions which can really play tricks with the eyes. And I have seen things that were perfectly explainable that really looked like something totally extraordinary, but they were explainable.
And as Wayne tells me, even cloud formations can be misleading.
Lenticular clouds are often mistaken for UFOs.
Pretty extraordinary, aren't they?
Lenticular clouds the wind comes hitting the mountains, swoops up, and as it goes over the top, the clouds form. I have seen a half a dozen UFOs, lenticular clouds that were one, about a minute later, a second one, and so on.
The cloud story may explain some of the unusual sights witnessed in this area, but it doesn't begin to account for the Roswell incident. Debris was recovered from the crash site, so there is physical evidence that something did come down on the plains of San Agustin. But the mystery surrounding Roswell comes from the fact that the US Air Force changed their version of events 3 times. One of those stories was linked to a covert military operation flying out of the Roswell area. Duke Gildenberg ran a secret program called Skyhook, designed to fly balloons over the Soviet Union, with spy cameras attached.
The Skyhook balloon wasn't born until 1947, and therefore, when it first appeared and for the first 5-10 years, it was a new sight in the sky. Holloman Air Force Base, then Alamogordo Air Base, was the prime launch site for the United States Air Force, and it happens to be just upwind of Roswell, so when the balloons would climb out, even if they were going to go 1,000 miles the other way, the initial climb out would be in the direction of Roswell, close enough to see even if they get right overhead. Every flight we flew generated UFO reports. In fact, for a while, we were even using it as a backup tracking system. We call up a town and say, anybody see a UFO this afternoon? Yeah, one to the, okay, what direction? To the south? Okay, keep an eye on it. We allowed them to remain UFO reports with the hope being that once they got over the Soviet Union, they'd still be registered as UFO incidents rather than our reconnaissance balloons.
Is it your contention that Roswell is explicable as a balloon crash?
That is correct. I worked on the Pentagon report for months and months and months.
Was what crashed at Roswell a spy balloon from a secret program the government was trying to hide? I'm not sure. I've seen a memo in the National Archives that suggests there was more to the incident than the Air Force was admitting.
In September 1947, just a few weeks after the Roswell crash, General Twining, head of the Air Materiel Command, issued a classified memo to a small group of his senior officers outlining his concern about the rash of flying saucer sightings that had been seen across America earlier that summer. In the memo, he states that the phenomenon is something real and not visionary or fictitious, that there were objects approximating the shape of a disc in the sky. He talks of operating characteristics such as extreme rates of climb and maneuverability. One of his conclusions, indeed, is that these discs might be the product of some high-security project not known to his command.
The Twining memo shows the Air Force was taking the flying saucer sightings seriously. The next stop on my journey is Nevada, where I'm going to meet someone with high-security clearance who might throw light on what really crashed at Roswell. I'm here to see Colonel John Alexander, Vietnam vet, ex-Special Forces and military intelligence. He's taken a close interest in the Roswell incident.
Part of the problem has been the government itself. On Roswell, they have been less than forthcoming. They've been caught time after time just overtly lying to the public. And so the government's credibility in this field is pretty damn low. So you can't, they can't come out and say, well, here's the truth today.
Do you think that these vehicles have crashed to Earth, and do you think that the US military has recovered them?
No.
Why not?
Why? I'll tell you why not, and this is where I get in trouble with everybody. I looked. I am, kind of the one person who has gone nose to nose with the head of all of the intelligence agencies and whatnot. We looked from a historical perspective. I can mention now that Edward Teller was one of the folks who was interested in my work in other fields.
Edward Teller. He was the assistant director at Los Alamos National Laboratory and father of the H-bomb. If alien technology had been found by the military, he would surely have known about it.
I actually had him over for dinner. We had this discussion. He was not opposed to the notion of UFOs. We always said if 5 people knew at that time, Teller would have been one of them, because understanding energy, and he was the one who was working on the most advanced energy source known at the time, and you get the absolutely not.
So Teller told Alexander that whatever crashed at Roswell, and something certainly did, it was not extraterrestrial. Not a balloon, but a different secret program? Perhaps what really crashed at Roswell is related to the work of the German scientists during World War II. I'm going to examine an American operation to capture these scientists and bring their technology to the US at the end of the war.
In 1945, President Truman ordered a secret operation codenamed Project Paperclip. It instructed the US military in Germany to round up German scientists and persuade them to carry on their work in America.
This is where most of the Paperclip scientists ended up. White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, a top-secret base surrounded by a no-go zone the size of a small country.
Probably well over 2,000 scientists were brought to this country. I have a listing, which I got from the Air Force History Office, of all the scientists that were brought to Wright Field. And nearly 200 top-of-the-line scientists were brought to Wright Field. The Germans were anywhere from 5 to 15 years ahead in certain areas. For instance, you think of the V2A4 missile, not intercontinental at that time, but a first ballistic missile. That was a huge step at the time.
I've visited this area many times, and its power and beauty never diminishes. It's a strange mix of primitive landscape and high-tech doomsday hardware tucked into the southwest corner of America. And in 1946 it was really isolated, just the place to bring German scientists who would be totally cut off from the outside world.
The thing that bothered most of them that I knew more than anything was the summertime, because we get temperatures often here of 42 and 43 Celsius in July, June and July, and that was absolutely so incredible to them they couldn't believe it.
It was a vast cry from being in Germany, because they're used to mountains and forests. Okay, we got the mountains, but we don't have the forests down here. We don't have the water that they have, and things are quite a desert.
It was here that the German scientists created the beginnings of the American space program. And it is also here in this highly secret territory that the number of UFO sightings really started to take off.
I was out stargazing, and I looked up, and I may have been for at the most 5 seconds. There was this large black triangle that just blacked out stars, and it was moving just across.
Making any noise?
No sound whatsoever, total silence. I never heard any reports about it, nothing.
And you have a massive database.
These are just a few.
Yeah. And what are these all these detail sightings of UFOs in the White Sands, Alamogordo, New Mexico region? I see they kind of range from the jocular to the more serious.
Anything I can get my hands on that I find.
So after all of these years, all of this study, your own sightings, what are you forced to conclude, Wayne?
I conclude that my government is lying to me.
About what?
About UFOs.
The US government has changed its version of the events at Roswell so many times that my investigative instincts tell me they wanted us to follow a false lead. Perhaps the work of the German scientists could offer a completely new explanation for the Roswell incident. What evidence do you have that the Germans were working on flying saucer technology?
There certainly was an interest in that type of a vehicle after the war. It presented the possibility of some maneuverability that would be greater than what they would have had with the conventional piston or jet engines of that time using a fixed wing.
At the time of Roswell, the US Air Force was experimenting with radical new designs. Could this bizarre aircraft be based on this one? A design drawn from secret Nazi blueprints seized by the Americans after the war.
Some of these may indeed have reached the point of being test flown. However, if they did not have a particularly remarkable advantage over other aircraft that were being pursued at that time, they may not have really gone much further than that.
Perhaps the Roswell crash can be linked to the work of the German aircraft designers quartered at White Sands in 1947. I think it's very possible that what crashed was a secret prototype based on these radical designs. But I can't prove it. The truth has been elusive, but what is certain is that UFO sightings in America were about to reach epidemic proportions, not just in New Mexico, but over the skies of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Sightings made headline news across the country, and the government was forced to act. Within 3 years of Roswell, public concern caused President Harry Truman to address the country on the subject of UFOs.
Oh, yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military. There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and they've had other things, you know, if I'm not mistaken.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris.
America was about to go saucer crazy.
To the best of our knowledge, my wife and I are the only ones left alive.
The 1950s was a time of high tension in the Cold War. As nuclear annihilation threatened, there was also a huge jump in UFO sightings across America. My journey to look for the truth behind UFO sightings has led me to Washington, D.C., where in 1952, a series of strange lights were seen over Capitol Hill.
In the midst of this big national flap, sightings occurred over Washington, D.C. This involved 3 radar sets in the Washington, D.C. area, which picked up targets that were traveling around in restricted airspace over the Capitol.
This couldn't be ignored. It had all the makings of a national emergency. Whether it was alien visitors or, as many in the military suspected, advanced Soviet spy technology, the Air Force had to act fast. Jets were launched against the UFOs, and the military made sure their actions made headline news. The intention was to reassure the public, and it might have worked but for the fact the following weekend, the 19th of July, the UFOs were sighted again. 1,000 people reported sightings, including staff from President Truman's office. The government had to be seen to act. General John Sanford, head of Air Force Intelligence, was given the job of reassuring the nation and explaining what people had seen.
In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them.
So here he was saying specifically they're not a threat to the United States, the implication being the Air Force is doing its job where there's no threat out there. In spite of the fact that the Air Force internal documents had said, you know, well, it might be Soviet, and used that as a reason to investigate and so on.
The Air Force's commitment to act on the UFO problem would result in one of the biggest military investigations in American history.
The Air Force, which had secretly been investigating UFOs since 1947, were forced to set up an open inquiry. Called Project Blue Book, it promised to investigate each separate sighting report that was filed by the general public. In spite of Air Force intelligence claims there was nothing to worry about, the US Air Force was actually taking UFOs very seriously indeed.
Heading up Blue Book's investigations was astronomer Dr. J. Alein Hynek. With his scientific background, Hynek was hired by the Air Force to interview thousands of witnesses and collate some of the public's most bizarre encounters.
Have you ever seen a meteor with headlights?
No, I've never seen a meteor with headlights. But one might see a meteor that looks like it has headlights.
Well,
however,
I do not drink, and this had some kind of light on the back.
All right, good, fine.
Hynek was a skeptic. During the course of his investigations, he was able to attribute many of the sightings to natural phenomena.
All of them saying that they saw it predominantly in an eastern direction. Now, if it had been extremely close to any one of them, it could not have been seen to the east by all the people.
But Project Blue Book had severe limitations. No sightings by military personnel were included in its pages. Instead, they were immediately classified and buried deep in the files of the Pentagon. Much to Hynek's frustration, because reports by Air Force pilots, of which there were many, intrigued him very much. But now we can tell the story of one such sighting for the very first time. It involves the early reconnaissance missions by the United States over the Soviet Union. During the 50s, Major Thomas Hanley was a radar operator and one of the first Cold War spies in the sky.
When you're flying, you are always aware of anything in your airspace. One particular night, the aircraft commander saw a bright light coming towards us. And all of a sudden, the light just went immediately to the other side of the aircraft. So we played cat and mouse with it, whatever it was, for an hour anyhow. But the ground was recording it, and they would lose it too on occasion. So there was something out there, something very strange. It was performing not like a normal aircraft would would perform. It was just too fast and too maneuverable. I'm certain something different was out there, but I have no idea what it was.
The problem for the US Air Force was that this man was extremely credible. He was one of their surveillance specialists, highly qualified and working with what was then state-of-the-art technology. As far as Tom Hanley is concerned, his questions were never answered. And I have to admit, I'm at a loss to explain it myself. But in the meantime, as a recently declassified CIA memo shows, the agency was becoming very interested in the UFO phenomenon for its own purposes. The CIA was responsible for surveillance of the Soviet Union, and it realized that UFOs might offer the perfect cover for its more clandestine activities.
This is a memo written by Walter B. Smith, the head of the CIA at the time. And it's important because it shows that the CIA were happy to leave the US Air Force with the problem of analyzing each UFO sighting. I suggest, Smith says, that we discuss at an early board meeting the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these phenomena for psychological warfare purposes. This is a pretty stunning document, but when you read something like this, what you've got to keep in mind, first and foremost, is its context.
The context, of course, was the Cold War and the struggle between America and the Soviet Union. But what really set the UFO story running for the CIA was the death in 1953 of Premier Joseph Stalin. I'm in Washington to meet Melvin Goodman, former senior analyst of the Soviet desk at the CIA, who can tell me exactly how the CIA set about manipulating the UFO story in order to gain the upper hand in the Cold War.
Melvin, hi.
Dick, hi. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Eisenhower had only been in office for 2 months, and Stalin died rather suddenly. And Eisenhower called in some of his major people, not only policy people and political people, but intelligence people. And so he went around the table in terms of what do we know about the Soviet Union, what do we know about the contenders for power, what do we know about the direction the Soviet Union might take in its policy. And he asked people who were also there from the CIA. And not only was there no speculation on what it would be like in the Soviet Union, and would the Soviet Union be more or less threatening to the United States, there was no intelligence collection. And I really think it was out of that discussion and that event that the beginning of the ideas that led to the U-2, the ability to conduct surveillance of the Soviet Union from the air with a high-altitude spy plane, I think it began with the turning point of Stalin's death and no understanding of what it meant for the United States.
This is the U-2. It's the direct result of American intelligence coming to terms with how little it really knew about post-Stalin Russia. We can't make sense of what happened next in ufology without trying to understand this once highly secret machine. It triggered a wave of UFO sightings all across America.
What was needed were certain cover stories. What do you do when people are spotting aircraft and then telling reporters that they've seen something very unusual flying out of an airbase in Nevada? And frankly, this was the origin of a lot of the sightings that took place in the mid-50s, 1954, 55, 56, of unidentified flying objects, the UFOs. So the CIA was involved in encouraging people to believe that, yes, they saw UFOs, and the CIA and the military tried to be very helpful to reporters to get these stories out, to divert the attention of the country, and particularly the people in this region, about what they had actually seen.
We believe that UFOs are real, that they are from outer space, and that they are intelligently controlled.
and then it went into a small cloud. Again, we spotted it as it came out of the cloud, and very shortly after that, it quickly disappeared. Traveled apparently on this side of the tower.
The CIA's strategy of encouraging public belief in UFOs seemed to be working, and the U-2's development and deployment was hidden behind a smoke